Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Peter Mullen, and I'm glad that you've joined us today on this new webinar that we're doing today. I want to welcome you all to the session. We're starting just a minute late. I'm trying to get a number of others hopefully will join us in progress. We always love folks to be with us, and we're grateful for you guys on the line today. My name is Peter Mullen, like I said, and I'm a presenter as well as a community outreach coordinator here within American Consumer Credit Counseling. It's housed in Newton, but we do serve folks all over the United States. We're a nonprofit that does provide a lot of financial assistance to folks in terms of education, in terms of counseling, and even in terms of some folks who ever want to get various plans where they can help manage their finances. That's something we're able to do as well. So thank you for joining us today. We are talking about a really good topic today. This has gained a lot of interest. We do 2 topics every month, and this one seems to have gained some good attention. We have people who at least signed up across 24 states. So I think that's extremely great. So almost half the country, somebody from each state is joining us, which is great. And a lot of really good questions have come ahead of time in the registration. So I certainly welcome all you as we go through this. You're in a listen-only mode right now, but my colleague Maddie will be helping us as we go through this, when I will open it up for various times for your questions as we go through a lot. I can tell you this is a very complex topic, and one that really goes into a lot of different topics and questions, and the numbers. I have to tell you, this is one of the most complex topics I've had to research for one of our webinars today. So let's get started with our session today, and again, begin to get into this great topic. So I want to start out with what our goals are for this whole idea in question about leasing versus buying a car. And I have to admit, to a degree, this is almost a misnomer, because it's really hard to compare, as you'll see, car buying versus car leasing. They're really, as I saw and got into this, and you'll see it too, they're really like 2 different animals. You have to evaluate them almost differently and separately. But let's go into this. We're going to talk about some of the mysteries surrounding car leasing, because there's a whole new terminology. There's a whole new set of things to learn about leasing you may or may not know. I want to cover certainly the advantages and disadvantages of each. We'll cover them separately, allowing you to make some thinking about each one. There's pros and cons of each, quite clearly. And then we will, toward the end, we'll do much more of a comparison where possible. Again, it's very hard to compare some things that have some fundamental differences to themselves. So our agenda is starting on that note, which is this whole idea that it's almost not even a matter of better. It's not saying this is better. It's like saying which is better, an apple or banana. Well, it's really hard to say one's better. It's a matter of choice. So we'll talk about that. We're going to talk about some of the terminology, because that really does help describe some of the new world you get into if you haven't leased. There's a lot to learn. And again, I'm here to help try to provide the objective pluses and minuses, and you make the decision, and I'll try to answer your questions as best I can. We'll talk about leasing pluses and minuses, and then buying pluses and minuses, and then some overall notes I'll end up with. Again, our hour will go quite quickly, and I do want to catch your questions as we go through it. So when we think about this whole idea about cars and about leasing, you know, part of your question might be, and I'll go with some of the questions you guys gave me, which I think are better ways to start. Some of the questions you gave me in the registration is things like this. Is leasing more cost effective or not? I can answer that. What factors should you consider in buying? Yeah, we'll address that. What are the risks of leasing? Yes, we'll address that too. So these are all great questions, and I'll cover others as we go through this. So here's how I start us off. I always like to start us off with a little bit of a thought process at the beginning. And since I've been in the market for a dog or a cat lately, I thought this was a great way to start. And also it's cute too. And that is simply this. When you ask people, there's people out in the world who love dogs, hate cats, people out there who love cats and hate dogs. And you can't really ask which is better. It's a matter of choice, right? Now there's some commonalities. They're all animals, they're pets, they got 4 legs, they eat and drink. But other than that, asking if they're better is almost a misnomer. So here's what I think we are getting to on this whole topic today. Really, it comes out to what do you like, what do you prefer, and what do you hate. So that's kind of what's driving the many things that I'll talk about today, and it's a matter of preference. So let's get into this topic of which is better, which again, like I said, a little bit of a misnomer. It's almost like, what do you choose? So what I have here as a starting point is 3 comments made by the many sources I read to get ready for today. And these are 3 pretty reputable sources. And this is what they said. In the end, you can't compare the two. Ultimately, it comes down to knowing what you want and what you can afford. So you personally need to figure those out for yourself. What do you want, what you can afford? Especially if you're going to lease, you need to know such things as how much do you drive each year? Because there's restrictions in how many miles you can have. So for instance, for you, if you're one who doesn't drive your car far, a lease might be good for you. But if you're someone who puts 20,000 miles on a year, a lease is going to cost you a heck of a lot more. Depends on your current financial picture. Again, there's some things that are better in the short term and some are in the longer term. You'll see that as we go through this. And then finally, I would just say overall, I'm going to be unveiling lots of pros and cons. I hope you will absorb them, think about them, and in the end, you will have to weigh this out for yourself. So I'm sorry to say I don't have any simple answers for you today. I have a lot of information, which I hope you will then use to the best for yourselves and what your particular needs are. I'm going to start with the idea of leasing because there's some interesting things here. Again, I think I learned an awful lot, and I think you'll be surprised at some of this if you've never leased. And it shows you some of the considerations. So let's start with this, and then again, I'll open it up to questions and ask Maddie to give me some of your questions, and or I'll pull some from the registration you gave me. So let's go through some of the terminology because it does tell part of what you got to get ready for, your brain to get ready for, if you do in fact start to lease. Okay, so let's go through. So first off, they've renamed a lot of things. We don't talk about the price of the vehicle. We talk about its capitalized cost. It means the same thing as price. Okay, when they talk about a down payment, they don't call it a down payment. They call it a capitalized cost reduction. Okay, fine, you can get used to that. Then we get to this whole thing of residual value. And the way that leasing works, so I'm going to talk today only in terms of a 3-year lease because it's the most common lease. So let's start to introduce what the significance of some of these terms are. And again, then I'll break it out for questions at the end of it. The whole thing you're doing when you have a lease is you are in effect paying for the depreciation of the car. So to give a very quick example, if you have a car that's brand new today and its cost or its capitalized cost is $30,000, the dealer is going to make a judgment, a guess, an estimate that 3 years from now, that car will be worth $20,000. And I'm just making that up just to make a round number. So since it's going to be worth $20,000 in 3 years, you have to pay the depreciation, which is $10,000. It goes from $30,000 to $20,000. You return the car when it's worth $20,000, and that's the first part of what you have to pay. So you're basically paying for the depreciated part of that car. So we'll get more into that later, but that's the residual value is what is expected at the end of the lease term. The next thing, again, that's a little bit different, I think, from maybe from a purchase is the drive-off cost is really, I think, very a little bit strange, definitely different from a purchase. So in simplicity, they will say to you, here's your drive-off cost, but it's really a combination of many things that we will unveil as we go through this. Potentially, it's all your down payment, your lease fees, your security, your deposit, your price of registration, taxes, etc., also known as the lease inception. So to drive off the lot, there's a lot of things that have to be taken care of. We'll cover them. Gap insurance is something that's new. That's not with a car. So basically, the concept is this, and we'll get into it again. But just be aware of the fact that when you first lease a car, you are potentially paying for the lease of a car whose market value is less than what you're paying for it. So therefore, in the event you drive that leased car off the lot, your regular insurance will not cover its full cost that you owe back to that dealer. And in that meantime, you would have to have some gap insurance to pay for that extra. Thus, another thing that people know in the housing industry, your car is essentially underwater to start because you're driving a car whose market value is less than what you're paying for it at the start. And since the dealer wants their full money back, they will ask you to take out gap insurance if it's necessary to make up that difference. Again, stay tuned, we'll cover more. When you have interest on a car, it's called interest, but they don't call it interest with a lease, it's called rent charges. And then finally, I thought this was an interesting thing with leasing. And I know this, by the way, because I've leased 3 cars, so I can speak to this personally later. They use a new term for credit cards, right? They use what they call the credit card test on your car when you return it. It's not your credit as it stands on a credit card, it's the size of your credit card. So physically, they will look and match up something that's what, 2 inches by 3 inches to see if there's any scratches over that. Then you have a certain amount of payment you have to make up for that. So there's kind of a lot to this. I want to just reiterate again what's kind of different here. And one of the difference is this thing of gap insurance. And I guess one of the ways I like to think about it, for those that know about housing, it's very much like the concept when you put 20% down on a house, you don't have to pay PMI, private mortgage insurance. If you put down less than 20%, you have to pay PMI to make it up for the lender. That's very much what like gap insurance is like. So if you put down a 20% down payment on a lease, you can get rid of gap insurance. So hopefully I've thrown out some interesting things to start. I want to open it up for your initial questions. Maddie, I'm going to just simply ask people if they want to ask some questions. I'm going to open that up right now and see if there's any questions that people might have. What you all can do is write your questions in. Maddie will get them and she'll feed them back to me. While they're in the process of doing that, let me just read a few more questions that I did receive, some great questions, as we begin to get into this complex and interesting topic. So a number of folks asked, what is the best option for rural areas where you can go over the mileage on leases and so on? Anybody who wants to lease a car, you absolutely have to have thought ahead how many miles you're going to drive. That's advised by everything I read. So if you know that you are going to drive more than most leases expect 10 or 12,000 miles a year. So if you know you're going to put on more than 12,000 miles a year, and that means 36,000 miles in 3 years, you should probably not get a lease, because at the rate of 10 cents to 50 cents a mile over, you will be paying a lot of money. Okay, no questions coming in so far, but I'm glad to answer them. Let me do another question. What is the better option for seniors or retirees? A number of you asked that. And I'll simply say, it's like anything else. You have to have budgeted for this. If you're on a fixed income, either you're buying or leasing, there's a lot of money involved, right? The only difference you'll come to see is there's generally with a lease, there's less money up front, but it still costs over the 3 years. But for a purchase, there's more money up front, but in the long term, that can be something that, you know, is cheaper over time. So again, you can't really compare, they're just different. All right, so I'm going to go to the next slide and let's start digging into, and I still welcome your questions to come into Maddie and she'll give them to me. So let's talk strictly about leasing a vehicle, and let's get the advantages out and then we'll talk about the disadvantages. So what's the advantage of leasing a vehicle? Well, number one, you're usually doing a lease, and we're talking in terms of 3-year leases now for our examples today. And your initial payments per month are generally lower. You're leasing, and again, what you are doing is you are really renting the amount of the depreciation. So if the car's depreciation will go down 12,000 in 3 years, your lease is paying for the depreciation part of the car. There's other prices too, but that's just one of them. But in the initial term, when you're comparing and looking at them, it's generally a much lower cost per month. You also get this great feature with leasing. You're always getting the latest and greatest car. And I think that's one of the big attractors to people. So someone who might say, I don't want to mess around with maintenance. I want something that's new and great and shiny. Then leasing is for you because your car is always new. It's always the latest, has the best safety. It might even be under the warranty. Again, it depends. If your term and your warranty, term is how many years. If your term and your warranty coincide together, and this goes back to a question somebody asked too, will I have to pay for certain types of things? The answer is no. If it's under your warranty and you're in that time period, it's covered because you're having a brand new car, so it's going to be less trouble-free, right? So you're in a sense paying a premium to keep a new car in your driveway all the time. So that's what you're doing. No big surprise. When you're doing a down payment, you're just like a regular car, you're able to do one. And I've seen advice both ways about it could be lower or it should be lower. Generally, people do not pay a greater down payment on a lease. But remember what I said a little bit earlier about the whole idea of gap insurance. So a unique thing to leasing is that you have to cover the potential cost of if your car was totaled. It's very possible that your leased car's market value, meaning what your insurance company will pay you for, is less than what you currently owe the dealer right now. So therefore, to make up for that difference, because they want their money, right? They want their money back because they want the car back too, don't forget. You would have to take out gap insurance to cover up the difference. So yes, you would have your regular car insurance and then gap insurance. So here's a little caution note for you all. Don't get this gap insurance through the dealer. It costs far more to buy this from the dealer than it does just to simply add it on to your current car insurance. I'm talking anywhere from, I've heard as low as just 20 bucks a month to add it onto your car insurance versus paying huge amounts, as much as $700 or $800 through the dealer. It's just quite a vast difference. Sales tax could be lower, should be lower, because if you think about it, you're paying not for the whole car. You're buying a piece of a car. You're buying its depreciation. That's what you're buying. That's what you're renting. So if the car was $20,000 in total capitalized cost, it went from 20 and it's going to go from 30 down to 20 in 3 years. You're paying simply the depreciation part. And then last but not least is that the future doesn't affect you. They made a prediction as to what the car will be worth in 3 years. That's what's known as the residual value. It is what it is. They're locked. They can't change it. And so you're paying basically on the payments on the depreciation of that car up until the 3-year period is over. So those are the benefits as I see it and as I've heard it and read it. Some funky things here that for you is that it's interesting, and this is true different by region. So it depends on what state you're in. So get this. For some states or regions, you pay taxes on just the lease portion, the $10,000 or the depreciation that you would have. But in some other states, you pay the sales tax on the whole car, even though you didn't buy the whole car. Some states or regions make you pay the full sales tax. That's why I can't say it will be lower. It could be lower. And the future value doesn't affect you because they've locked it into that residual value, which is what they expect it to be worth. And they can't change that after the fact. Okay, if there's any questions, please feel free to jump in. I'm going to go now to some of the ideas of the disadvantages now. So we'll go through this and then we'll come back to some overall comparisons. So what's the disadvantages of having a lease? Well, there's a good number of them you have to be aware of. First, you're paying for the premium, paying for the depreciation of a car, but you never own an asset. Your money is constantly going out. Your payments never end. So that what that means is if you continue to lease, I lease for 3 years, my lease is up, I don't have a trade-in. I don't have an asset. I have nothing at the end of 3 years. If I want to get another car and I want to continue leasing, I'm in a continual leasing mode. I never stop paying a payment unless I want to switch over at some point to buy, which is another topic we'll get to. So in this sense, you never realize the cost-saving part of a car. The cost-saving part potentially is when you own a car and you pay it off in 3 years, or that's what I'm doing for comparison, you own the car in 3 years and you own an asset that's worth something and it could be sold. Further, as you continue to use that car and ride it and use it, then you have an asset that in fact can still get you around from here to there. It's not the latest and greatest, but it's cheaper in the long run. Your payments are gone, unless it's in poor condition, of course. That would be another issue. So let's listen to all these restrictions. This is something that might be new to you all, and this is what really caught me in terms of all the things that the lease holders might require of you. So let's again go through some of these and then let's open it up for further questions, hopefully that you'll have on this. The restrictions, well, first, I've already mentioned mileage. Typically, they will not allow much more than 10,000 to 12,000. It depends on your lease. So you can't drive that car over 36,000 miles in the 3 years unless you want to start paying a good amount per mile. So if you brought it back with, 1,000 miles over, you do the math. That times 50 cents, if that's what it is, you have to pay an extra 500. Usage is how you use it, where you use it. So get this, you cannot, in some leases, drive your car to Mexico or to Canada. They restrict that. That's part of their lease. They might also have modifications. You cannot change anything on that car. You can't add tinted windows. You can't do things to it that you'd want to do as if it's yours. It's like almost like very much like renting a house versus, or renting an apartment versus buying a house. You only can do so much to modify. A big one that I find is one of the big questionable parts of leases is this whole bit of the condition you have to bring it back in. And what I mean by that is you have to bring a car back, according to your lease, in showroom condition. Now, how you define that and how you basically do that is a lot of that's left up to the vendor's description. And so therefore they are able to, and this happened to me personally, so I'm just talking from now my own thing. I actually had a car I brought back from a lease, and I brought it to a friend who was a body repair person, and they worked on it and did like $1,500 worth of body repair to make it perfect. And when I brought it back to the leaser, the lessee or the lease place, the dealer, they still found somehow $1,400 worth of damage, which I couldn't believe. And I had to pay them $1,400 on top of everything else. So those are things you got to deal with. You have to realize, not only how many miles you're doing, but even when you go to do repair, let's just say you got into an accident. You have no choice. You have to repair it with the factory parts. You can't go and get aftermarket parts. It's their car. They want it the best you can possibly do. So your cost of repairing that car may go well beyond what your insurance company is willing to pay for. They will typically pay for what they call the aftermarket parts, cheaper parts. But this is not your car, so therefore they want it done with the best parts. So I already mentioned about showroom condition. These are some of the things you have to deal with. And then there's a bunch of stuff here just in terms of potential lease end costs. So when you go to return that car, I already mentioned about the dealer discretion, but this is where I think, again, is a lot of unregulation or chances for bad stuff. You have to pay a disposition fee. You have to pay certain types of document fees, potentially bank fees, prep fees, delivery fees. There's all kinds of fees that the dealer might tack on. And some of these are strictly bogus. But get this one, the title ad valorem tax. Now, I haven't done Latin in a while since I was in 7th grade. But basically, you have to pay a property tax in places like Georgia. So the numbers can add up. So you just got to be aware of all this going into it as you lease your car. Again, I'm not trying to say you should or shouldn't, but you go into it with your eyes open. Questions at this point from anybody before I go on into the buying? So I'm asking the question for questions. See if anything else is going to come in before we move on. As we're waiting for some live questions, let me just go back and see if there's a couple more. Yes, so some questions you guys asked so far, which was great in the registration. Is it better to buy a used or new car? Very good question. And I can jump to kind of one of the secrets of a lot of this, by the way. If you're willing to go used, not new, a lot of what we're talking about today is really different. Getting a good used car is far cheaper than buying or leasing a new car. Now, maybe that's not any great revelation, but if you're willing to do that, talk about money savings. Someone else asked just before we started today, how do you know the right time? Good question. All I can say is you have to think of lots of things. What are the interest rates today? Find yourself a less popular car, because you pay a premium, either whether you're buying or leasing. For popular cars, they'll charge you a lot more. Think about your long-term plans. Think of beyond 3 years. What do you want? What are you going to do? How much driving are you going to do? And recognize that used cars are a great way to go, but even those are in demand, so you don't get a break there. All right, so let's go on to some more, the buying now. Buying a car. So what are the advantages of buying a car? Some of these are pretty obvious, but let's cover them quickly. You own the vehicle as long as you want, and you do whatever you want with it. You can improve it. You have it. You pay, but you pay a lot for it. So we'll get that on the disadvantages. But you have the freedom, not all those restrictions I mentioned. You have the freedom to fix it or not, sell it whenever. You have flexibility. So it's your car. So that's both a good thing and a bad thing, but it's your car. When you own it and when it's owned, you've paid it off, you have no more monthly payments to make. Your insurance usually goes down. You can get whatever kind of part you want. So these things are the kinds of things you get with time. Now, of course, the downside, which we'll cover, is that your car is getting older. If it's over 3 years old, well, it's not top of the line with the latest gadgets now, but it's your car and it's an asset, something you own. Your purchasing process is usually simpler than leasing, and then you do have some equity in the car as you go on, and its value as an asset, yes, does go down over time, but you have an asset. So these are the advantages that all comes to me if I simplify it. So cars have some pluses to them. That's why it's hard to compare. These things are not all comparable to a lease. What are the disadvantages of having a car? Well, as we go with cost, again, it depends on whether this is short-term or long-term. In the short term, in the immediate 3 years, and I'm pretending now that you're buying the car in 3 years versus leasing it in 3 years, you're putting on a lot of money in 3 years. And you have to pay the interest sales tax on the entire car. So you're buying a full car, paying for the full tax and insurance and interest on the full car, not just a piece of it. In the end, you get an asset. But then again, that asset, its value is unknown to you. Like, who knows if you have a car that, just has all kinds of repair issues after you have it. So it's your car. You have no one else to go to but yourself, unless you can get some kind of a, rebate or something from the dealer. It's your car. Hopefully it's good. You can resell it, but you can run up the mileage that you want, but maybe that begins to lower its value. So the market value of a car, and I'll show you this, does go down every year. It's pretty predictable. And I'll show you some things that might, again, make you decide. But you have to consider some of these things as you go forward. They're all risks to you. As an owner, you have an asset, that's great. but we don't know what the value of the asset is going to be as we get into its fourth, fifth, and sixth year. It could be something that really causes you a lot of expense. We don't know. Over time, it won't be the latest and greatest anymore. I mean, time goes by. We're now in 2021. So we're talking about a car if you had from 2018 as an example. It may be a great car. It may be a dog by this point. Who knows? You buy a car today, what's it going to be like in 2024? Who knows? We don't know. And then the warranties come to an end. So that's another downside of having bought a car. So here's where we get to some interesting stuff. And I've done my best to, as I told you, this is quite complex. I did a lot of work to try and make a comparison of, as I've tried to do, apples to apples comparison as much as I could. So that's what this is an attempt to do. So let me show you a couple things here as we get into some numbers now. So if you like numbers and you want to get into that, that's what we're going to get into. So I'm going to start by showing you this situation, and I'm pretending this is a $30,000 brand new car. And if it's a car you're buying, it's called cost. If it's a car you're leasing, it's called capital cost. Your interest rate here is 4%, but that's all what's known as the rent on the car. You're renting the depreciation, basically. It's crazy. So the market depreciation of a car, watch this yellow line now. The yellow line here shows you, and this is one of those things you always hear about, according to Ramsey, a pretty well-known financial author, you literally, if we bought this car at $30,000, within seconds, according to Ramsey, others will say 1 month, but Ramsey says you lose $3,000 within seconds of buying the car. So it immediately goes from $30,000 to $27,000 within seconds. And you can see each year, it's going approximately down, a certain amount, anywhere from 15 to 25% in depreciation each year. So the key for us in our example today is to look at year 3. So that $30,000 car in 3 years has what's called a residual value of $17,300. So that gives you an indicator as to what you're going to pay for this in a lease. You're going to pay $12,700. That's the amount it depreciated in 3 years. That's part of your payment. But what you'll also notice here is that if you own the car continually, you have an asset that's declining in value, but you still own the asset. So let's compare now leasing. So let's look at leasing. When you lease, and I'm pretending here again, it's a 3-year lease, you will pay, believe it or not, somewhere between $18,200 to $22,200 for the lease of 3 years. And I'm going to show you the numbers, so hopefully I'll convince you in the next slide, which you're going to have some patience with, but you'll see the numbers behind this. You do that for a lease and you have no asset. So that's the point I've been making right along. So, it's not like it's cheap. You pay a lot. Let's compare that to a purchase now. So the lease line is green. The purple line I'm going to show you is the purchase line. So you'll notice some differences here that, again, I had to do it in 3 years to make it comparable. So in the 3-year period, you start with taxes at the beginning. So you pay over 30. You pay, it depends on your tax rate, but you pay taxes up front. And you pay basically the amount of this car, let's just say $32,000. But at the point that you now have 0 payments, year 3, right? You've paid all this money over that same period. You now have an asset. You'll notice the asset is worth $17,300. So your difference, your cost difference, in other words, you paid $32,000, but you have an asset. It's not liquid, it's not cash, but you have an asset worth $17,300. Your net cost was $14,700. The lease cost was between $18,000 and $22,000. Now you might be wondering, why do I have such a range? You'll see that when I get to the next slide as to how varied the amount of lease end costs are. They vary from anywhere from like $1,000 to $5,000. It depends. It depends on so many factors. So this is trying to show you, at least on one level of comparison, you have a declining asset over time. You pay less money up front on a lease, but over time, at the end of the 3 years, they actually catch up to each other. Let's look at one more thing here, and that is, let's just pretend, what a lot of people do, they take out another lease after 3 years. You don't have a car. What are you going to drive? So if you take out a second lease, and I'm pretending it's the same basic thing, a $30,000 car, you get an asset and you pay anywhere from 18 to 22. Then over that full time, you will have paid out something in the realm of $444,000. I'm sorry, $44,000, but no asset. In that same time, in the second set, in the next 3 years, you pay just for maintenance and taxes on that car. You own an asset. It's worth $17,300 and declines down to $10,000. So you still have an asset, but you have had to pay for its maintenance and taxes. Again, what are they? I don't know. Depends on how good a car you bought. So you can see how it's such a challenge to kind of compare them. But when you look at the big picture, I can just simply say this kind of a observation. In the short term, you're paying just for the lease, and it may be comparable to a purchase, but you have no asset. On a purchase, you have something that, yes, probably pays a lot up front, but then over time, it has an asset that you can then trade in, you can resell, or you can just keep it until the thing doesn't run anymore. Questions on any of that? This might raise some questions as we go through this next piece. So unless I see some questions coming in from Maddie, I'm going to continue to go. Let's see if there's anything coming in. Any questions? No questions coming in yet. So let's see, and here's where I want to show you some magical stuff that makes leases so different. So different. We're again using this concept of a $30,000 car, and so you're getting it for a 3-term lease. The residual value, what's the value going to be in 3 years, is that magical number that the dealer comes up with. So you're paying essentially, your first payment is for the depreciation value. So 30,000 minus 17,300 and 17,300, and that's 36 months. You have to pay $353 a month. So I see. All right. All right. So I'm going to try and answer this question I see coming in. What if you have a 2007 car paid off and you want to get a new car? Well, that's a very good question. I think you're pretty much back to the whole lease buying again, because a 2007 car, I would dare say, it's now what, 13, 14 years old? I doubt you're going to get much of a trade-in. You might get a little bit. So you can use that trade-in for either one. So I don't know if this answers your question, but you still are going to have to be faced with leasing or buying. If you go to trade that in, it's certainly not going to give you a lot of money, but you've gained by the fact you've had it so long, you have not been making payments. I happen to have a 2003 Toyota Camry. So that car is 18 years old, and it's nothing more than just the maintenance. So try with another question if I haven't answered you, but let me go on with this. So here's a really funky part about leasing you all need to see. If the annual lease rent they tell you is 4%, this is something very unique to cars, to leasing. They come out with a monthly factor, and here's how they do it. They do it by dividing your lease, your rate, your interest rate or rent charge by 2,400. And that number in this case is 0.001667. So many times in a lease, they might not even give you the interest rate. They will tell you this is the monthly factor, which of course confuses everybody. Nobody knows what it is. But here's how it's used. To get your lease fee, they take the full amount of your cost of your car, $30,000, plus the residual value, $17,300, and for some reason add them together. Take that number and multiply it by this factor. So you add on to your depreciation costs, you add on the $78.83. The lease payment is those two amounts. Now you take taxes on top of that. let's just say 5%. So at this point, that's 2160. So you can see that so far, these three components, the depreciation spread over 36 months, the lease fee with this weird formula by a monthly factor, and then the taxes will come out at $453 per month. That's still only one part of our cost. So I see another question. Here's another one. What if you purchase the car after your lease is up? That's a very good choice. That's something you might do. And yes, you will get certain benefits by doing that. So it's something you may want to consider. It's something that some people do. So all I would say to you is ask your dealer about what you could save if you want to buy the car. Yes, you will have certain breaks made, and it's going to depend on the dealer. So yes, that's something that some people do. You get the lease for the 3 years, but then you have to, don't forget, in a way, you're starting at the depreciation value now, at the residual value, and you're buying the car at that 17.3 in this case. So you're starting from there, buying that car. Good question. Now let's get into some funky stuff here, and that is this. So far, I'm not finished. Let's add some new stuff on top of leases, and that is this. Before you get a lease, you have to pay an acquisition fee of anywhere from $500 to $1,000. It depends on your dealer. During the lease, all these payments that I just came up with, $453.42, you pay at 36 of them, that's $16,000. The possibly pay of the gap insurance that I mentioned to you, if you were below that market value amount, you'd have to pay gap insurance, which goes anywhere from actually $20 to $700. It can go quite a range. And then here's where a lot of weird stuff comes in. When you go to return that car to the lot, so this is 3 years later, 3 years after you bought it, you have to pay a disposition fee of $200 to $500, a document fee of $200 to $800, and then possible things like wear and tear on the car, mileage, 10 cents to 50 cents actually over every mile, maintenance on tires and glass, potentially a property taxes if you're in Georgia, prep fees, delivery fees, bank fees, ADM fees, which is additional dealer markup fees, or additional dealer profit fees. So all that means, and that's why I gave you guys a range that said you have anywhere to pay overall for that one car, $18,000 to $22,000. So I'm going to back up for 1 second, back to this slide. That's why I said that green part that's below the, above the 3 or the 6 means that you're returning that car. You could make anywhere, you have to pay anywhere from $1,000 to $5,000 to get that car back in the door. We don't know until you do it. I wanted to show you this slide, which is depreciation. This is interesting, came from Ramsey. Again, just to show you that there's, you got to recognize this. So one of your tips to yourself might be, you want to get a car that has the highest amount of value after 5 years or after 3 years. In other words, it doesn't depreciate that much. So this is giving you at least what Ramsey says. I'm not going to doubt it or question it, just what he says, that you have some cars that have a very low depreciation, like a Wrangler, a Tacoma, a Tundra. So their value after 5 years is pretty high, as opposed to some of these other ones on this list. Looking at the Nissan Leaf as an example, it's only worth 28% of its value after 5 years. So here's what it means to you. If you're leasing, you're paying for the depreciation. So you want to aim for leasing cars that have a very low depreciation rate. You're paying for the depreciation of that car in 3 years. So the example I had given, again, I'll go back to it. In this particular case, in 3 years, it only went down to 17.3. The range of that is anywhere from, cars typically lose anywhere from 45% to 60% of their value in 3 years. If you have one that had 60% of its value gone, that means that car would only be worth $13,000 at that point. You will have had to have paid $17,000 because its depreciation was so high. I know that these numbers might be hard to absorb, but you got to at least come away thinking there's a lot of stuff I got to consider. Last thing I'm going to give you is tips and cautions, and then we'll end up with a summary. And these are just some thoughts I have after reading all of this, and I look further for any questions. You guys asked, oh, here's another question did come in. Here's another one. What if you purchase the car? Okay, that's fine. We already answered that. So here's what you might want to think about. If you do purchase, if your purchase loan is paid off, so you're in a situation where now you have the asset, the car, but you're not making payments, to be ready for the next time when that car dies or when you want to then get another car, you're no longer making a payment. So one of the things you may want to do, is just an advice, is take what would have been your payment and save it. By doing that, putting that in the bank, you're building up, not only you have an asset sitting in the driveway, but you have savings sitting in the bank. So you're ready when the next car purchase or lease comes up. One thing that's good to know is the second point here. In either case, leasing or buying, one of the things that's important for you to know is the true cost of that vehicle. If you remember some of the math on leasing, that figures in. If they've overpriced your vehicle, then you're going to have and end up paying more in some fashion. So part of your challenge for both is for you to try to push that dealer down, whether you're buying or leasing, to get the cost of the overall vehicle down. So one of the big tricks dealers do, and this is for both leasing and buying, is number 3, they try to focus you on just the monthly payment. That's one of the biggest tricks in the book, to get you to be focused on, can you afford, hello ma'am or hello sir, can you afford $350 per month? Great, I can get you in a car. But there's so many things they're not telling you. You've got to figure out what the true value is, what the depreciation is, what all their other hidden costs are. Somebody did ask me about credit, and all I can say is I've heard and read that you have to have good credit for both, but leasing a car, it's even higher. So you have to have good to excellent credit to get a lease. So they will not generally lease one to somebody who has poor credit. One of the tricks in the book is this next to last one, is they may tempt you with a low price. You can get into this car for a low price, but then their mileage allowance may be, let's just say, only 8,000 miles a year. Well, again, you have to have done your homework. If you know that you drive 15,000 miles a year, then you can't buy that car without paying a lot extra if it's only $8,000 limit. I mean, 8,000 mile limit. You'll go far beyond it. So again, just do your homework and think of your own situation before you lease. How much do you drive per year? Go in informed. It may be worth it, it may not. And then this last point is simply to say, a lengthy car loan can turn your value upside down. So if you have a long car loan, you may have a situation where you're still paying on a car whose value has gone down so much. Again, it's like another case of it being underwater. So you have to even judge on your car loans. If you take out one too long, like in other words, some people are taking out 5 and 6 and 7 and even 8-year car loans, it's generally not considered a good thing to do, because now you're paying on something that's, again, not worth even the price you're paying for it. I summarize by saying this to you all, and I again look for any questions and comments you have. Again, I haven't heard a lot, but you've had some good questions at the beginning. Here's some just to walk away with. I'm sorry to you folks that I wasn't able to come away and say leasing is better than buying or buying is better than leasing. There's no easy answer. It's up to you. You got to decide what you want. You need to ask a million questions. There's no two ways about it. You need to know what you want and then delve into it. Leasing a car is very difficult to understand. And the numbers of all those end numbers I talked about, all the ones about when you return the car right to the dealer, and I went through them all, but I'll just mention some of them again. When you return the car to the dealer, you're going to be paying, again, varying on each dealer and each region. Disposition, document fees, mileage fees, wear and tear fees, maintenance fees, property tax fees, prep fees, dealer fees, delivery fees, bank fees, ADM fees, ADP fees, all vary by region. Don't be swayed by a monthly payment. Don't let them suck you in and say you only have to pay $350. There's always more to it than that. Negotiate very hard to get that car price or cap cost low to start. So if you know you have a car that you're looking at, you start pressing them just as if you're buying it, and get that car they say it's $30,000 because of their MSRP, their retail price that they're saying, manufacturer suggests retail. Get that $30,000 car down to 25, and then start working out your lease. You're starting with a lower number. I ended with these two thoughts from strictly a cost perspective, strictly going on cost and nothing else. Buying or leasing a good used car is your cheapest alternative from everything I've read. From strictly a reliability, current, clean perspective, if that's what's important to you, safety, things like that, leasing is probably the best for you. They're apples and oranges. You can't really say one's better. They're just different. I want to open it up, Maddie, to any more questions or any questions people have. I will go back to the questions I have. We still have just a few more minutes, but I would love to have some live questions from you folks. So please, if I brought up any thoughts or wasn't clear, please let me know. No new questions, okay. I'm just looking at now the questions I received when you guys all did the registration. Here's one I didn't cover yet. Can I get repairs done for free of charge on a leased vehicle? And the answer is more than likely yes. It all depends on what's under the warranty and how that's covered in the length of time. Within a 3-year time frame, the question is, does the warranty last all 3 of those years? The good news is you generally have very little for repairs. If you crash the car during those 3 years, that's a different situation. Remember, if you crash the car, you got to buy the factory parts for it. And if your insurance company will not cover that cost, you have to pay out of pocket for the difference between a aftermarket part, let's just say that goes for, I don't know, a starter, $300 versus a factory one for $500. You'd have to pay $200 out of pocket for that because you're having to buy the factory part. What options make more sense if you have a large amount of debt? I would say that I can't see how it makes a difference. If you have a large amount of debt, you potentially have a lower credit score. And so you're going to be challenged to buy either car or lease either car. So that could be problematic. You might want to think of something else. If you have a lot of debt and you're trying to get a car, I guess it comes down to me. I would say leasing, because it's a different kind of an asset, and so therefore you're not putting on that kind of debt. However, there's this that I've learned though too. If you ever break a lease, you have a lease that's locked you in for 3 years. So think of the downside of that. If all of a sudden twins show up or kids show up, or all of a sudden in the 2nd year of your lease, you realize that car is no longer good for you. And your ability to get rid of that car, now your twins show up, there's no space for them. So you have yourself, again, a contingency that maybe you didn't think of. So there's pluses and minuses of either one. I thank you all very much for your time today, for the many good questions you sent in. I wish you all the best. I also want to end up by saying my name is Peter Mullen. You can reach me at pmullen, that's MULLEN, at consumercredit.com. And if you have any further questions on this today, any past webinars we've done, or on our future webinars, which I told you is coming up in September. One is on college education debt, and the other is on savings for emergencies. We have 2 for every month of the year, every month going on for the rest of the year. We'd be glad to tell you about them. Thank you all so much. Good luck with your choices. It's not an easy choice, but I'm sure you'll make the right one. Thank you all, and I'm going to say good night.